Hello students, welcome to the lecture on pattern of social inequality and exclusion. And after this lecture, we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain about caste prejudice, brief about castes and other backward classes, describe about marginalization of tribal communities, discuss to the struggle for women's equality, explain about the protection of religious minorities. Let us begin with society. In every society, some people have a greater share of valued resources, money, property, education, health and power than others. These social resources can be divided into three forms of economic capital in the form of material assets and income. Cultural capital such as educational qualifications and status, and social capital in the form of networks of contacts and social associations. For example, a person from a well-off family can afford expensive higher education and so can acquire cultural or educational capital. What is social inequality? Patterns of unequal access to social resources are commonly called social inequality. Social inequality reflects innate differences between individuals, for example, their varying abilities and efforts. Poverty and social exclusion are key causes of homelessness across developed nations. Social exclusion is related to homelessness at two levels. They influence the overall generosity of social welfare programmers and they affect the ability of particular households to access income, wealth, jobs and housing. Structural factors such as poverty and social exclusion may interact with individual vulnerabilities to produce and maintain homelessness. Caste prejudice. We studied in the previous chapters about the caste system of Hinduism in detail. There are various castes in Hinduism and each is expected to perform a predetermined function. Although in post-independent India, such discrimination has been outlawed to the extent that everybody has the right to receive education and apply for any job they like. Hinduism's caste system has been widely criticized all over the world for being unfair to humans. It is said that the psychology behind the caste system is rooted in the Hindu scriptures, the Rig Veda and the writings of Manu. These are derogatory about David's, teaching that the Brahmin came from God's head, the Kshatriyas from his arms, the Vaisya his thighs, and the Sudra his feet. Dalits do not figure and are therefore subhuman and polluted. The fact is that at the time of the scriptures, there were only 4 castes. All these were like parts of a human body, working together for the common good and all equally important. Over the following centuries, the caste system came to be abused and a 5th class of people, the Dalits, was identified. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Bible of the Hindus, Lord Krishna says that a learned man will look upon all living beings as equal. Hassan concludes by saying, moderate Hindus need urgently to demonstrate that Hinduism can be transformed in a way which entirely eliminates the shameful effects of caste. Scheduled castes and other backward classes. Let us learn a bit more about the backward classes of India. Inclusive growth demands that all social groups have equal access to the services provided by the state and equal opportunity for upward economic and social mobility. It is also necessary to ensure that there is no discrimination against any section of our society. In India, certain social groups such as the SCs, STs, OBCs and minorities have historically been disadvantaged and vulnerable. Our constitution contains various provisions for the development of such marginalized groups. For instance, Article 341 for SCs, Article 342 for STs, Article 340 for OBCs, Article 30 which provides the right to minorities to establish and administer educational institutions and so on. Scheduled castes. Who are they? The SCs constitute 16.23% of India's population. In the past, they have been socially ostracized, economically exploited, and denied human dignity and a sense of self-worth. People belonging to SC communities are spread all over the country, with 80% of them living in the rural areas. They constitute more than a fifth of the population of Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, Himachal Pradesh and West Bengal. Punjab has the highest proportion of SCs to the state population. More than half of the SC population is concentrated in the 5 states of Uttar Pradesh, 35.1 million, West Bengal 18.4 million, Tamil Nadu 11.8 million, Andhra Pradesh 12.3 million and Bihar 13.0 million. Constitution of India has taken important steps to help the SCs and improve their lives. The Constitution of India guarantees protection from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. It guarantees equality before law and enjoins upon the state not to discriminate against any citizen on grounds of caste. Untouchability is abolished and its practice in any form is forbidden. The Constitution mandates that no citizen shall, on grounds only of caste or race, be subjected to any disability and restriction. It empowers the state to make Articles 243D and 340D. In addition to the above, the Parliament has enacted the Untouchability Offences Act 1955, renamed as Protection of Civil Rights Act in 1976. To check and deter atrocities against SCs, the Scheduled Castes and the Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989 has also been enacted. Let us know more about other backward classes now. The second Backward Classes Commission, headed by B.P. Mandal, 1980, basing its calculation on the census of 1931, estimated that OBCs constituted 52% of the population. Recently, the NSSO 61st round, July 2004 to June 2005, report on employment and unemployment situation among social groups in India gave an estimate of OBCs constituting 41% of the population. State-wise, OBC-wise data on population as well as vital and demographic variables are not available, which is a main hurdle in the formulation of policies and programmers for the development of the other backward classes. Though the Constitution does not make specific provisions for OBCs, it empowers the state to make provisions for reservation in appointments or posts in favor of any backward class of citizens which, in the opinion of the state, is not adequately represented in the services. It also empowers the state to appoint a commission to investigate into the conditions of socially and educationally backward classes. In pursuance of the Supreme Court judgment Indira Sahni and others versus Union of India 1992, the National Commission for Backward Classes was set up on 14th August 1993 under the National Commission for Backward Classes Act 1993. Thus, after 46 years of independence of the country, the backward classes or OBCs got recognition as a separate group of people for the purpose of 27% reservation in services in the GOI and public sector undertakings. The states, UTs, were free to decide the quantum of reservation based on the OBC population in their state, UT. All state governments' UT administrations were also directed by the Supreme Court of India in the same case to set up a permanent body and to draw up their own list and decide the quantum of reservation as per their demography. Let us talk about the economic development of the socially backward classes. The NBC-FDC provides financial assistance through SCAs nominated by the state governments, UTs. NBC-FTC assists a wide range of income-generating activities, which include agricultural and allied activities, artisan and traditional occupations, technical trades, small-scale and tiny industry, small business, transport services. Entrepreneurs also are provided assistance. The government has also been regularly providing reservation in education for these classes to ensure that they are educated and can help the betterment of the rest of their classes. Marginalization of tribal communities. Southeast Asia is home to a large mountainous region straddling the borders of Thailand, Myanmar, China, Laos and Vietnam, which have historically served as a refuge for those seeking to escape the powerful and repressive valley states of the past. Today, it is home to the descendants of such people. No fewer than 9 distinct ethnic hill tribes have been officially recognized as living in northern Thailand alone. These hill tribes number around 7 lakh, representing approximately 1.2% of the country's total population. While these different ethnic minorities vary in culture, custom, language and religious practices, they are united in sharing a marginalized peripheral position vis-a-vis the Thai state. They are also united in being one of the poorest groups in all of Thailand. As a result of their poverty and isolation, they represent a challenge to the future of northern Thailand's economic development, particularly given the Thai state's environmental and commercial interest in the land that they occupy. Unfortunately for the hill tribes, their peripheral position within the Thai state has been exacerbated by the government's perception of them as being a problematic group that poses a threat to both national security and the environment. Thai population, while other policies appear to be working towards increasing their marginalization. The power of the modern state and its ability to create policies targeting specific populations, the identity conferred upon particular groups by it can be of great importance. The rise of the modern state, with its clearly defined borders and monopoly on the use of force, means that the hill tribes who were historically able to flee the state have come under its grasp. One of the more contentious issues surrounding the hill tribes in Thailand revolves around citizenship. Despite the fact that most hill tribes have lived within the borders of Thailand since its inception as a modern state, only 50 to 60% of these minorities actually hold Thai citizenship. This has effects on the rights of these tribals and makes them vulnerable to injustice. There are 2 principal colonial causes of tribal disaffection and their exploitation. The failure to recognize community proprietary rights over land of tribal communities in the Indian Forests Act 1927 that rendered them encroachers on their own land, and the highly unjust and oppressive features of the 19th century Land Acquisition Act. All talk of their welfare is futile without amending these 2 laws. There has always been a tussle over the natural resources of the forest where the tribals live, because many corporates have attempted to use their resources, thus infuriating the tribal communities. The struggle for women's equality. We will now move on to understand women's struggle for equality. International Women's Day was announced more than 100 years ago. Horrendous working conditions faced by women entering the workforce before and during World War I gave rise to militancy among women workers determined to struggle for an end to gender segregation, for better conditions and equal pay. A century later, these remain critical concerns for most women across the world and in Australia. Whether they are among the 70% of women working part-time or on short-term contracts, or sole mothers on the 250,000 long public housing waiting list, or Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander women in remote communities, or older women with little or no superannuation, or migrant or refugee women struggling with racist policies, life for most women is getting harder every day. Women are still stereotyped, exploited, sexually objectified, assaulted and harassed. Young women are living in a world where their expectations of gender equality and the reality of sexism and injustice are constantly clashing. Across Australia, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women continue to be outspoken about the living conditions of their communities and against the harsh Northern Territory intervention legislation. Our imagined world of justice and equality for women is not an impossible dream, because we know that society's common wealth could be reassigned to meet the needs of the majority. Economically, women are still disadvantaged, often earning less than men and ghettoized in low-paying, dead-end jobs. According to 2009's A Statistical Profile of Poverty in Canada, Canadian women still earn less, especially if they are single mothers, experience higher rates of poverty and experience poverty for longer periods of time than men. Collective struggle, not enlightened government, has always been the driving force behind the formal, although still limited, rights achieved for women. Despite arguments to the contrary, the women's rights movement is as relevant now as ever, even vital, and has even made remarkable progress in empowering women across the world. Today, we have women prime ministers and leaders in every sector. So much progress has been made and much more needs to be done. The protection of religious minorities. Let us move on now to the next and equally important section of the lecture, the protection of religious minorities. Protecting religious minorities has since the Peace of Westphalia been a major justification for international intervention. While the Westphalia system is often said to be premised upon the principles of state sovereignty and non-intervention, these principles were never understood as absolute. Both state practice and international legal theory contradict the assumption that European international law was a positivist legal order as applied among European states. Thus, even in the 19th century, legal universalisms in the traditions of natural law or international solidarity continued to provide justifications for violating the principle of non-intervention, and international legal theorists developed doctrines of legitimate interventions into other state sovereignty. The project analyzes the role of religious minority protection in these legal practices and discourses. Historically, the project focuses on the 19th and early 20th century, that is the formative period of a global framework of international law. Based on systematic analysis of international treaties and international legal discourse, the project analyzes how religious freedom was interpreted within these asymmetric constellations. It scrutinizes in particular whether the universal stipulation of religious freedom in multilateral agreements, like in the case of the Berlin Treaty of 1878, was meant to protect Christian co-religionist traders, missionaries, consuls in non-Christian regions, rather than to support peaceful inter-religious coexistence, as the wording of single articles may, in today's reading, imply. In doing so, the project contributes to uncovering important historical layers of contemporary discourses of religious freedom in international law. Indonesia. The Indonesian government is failing to protect the country's religious minorities from growing religious intolerance and violence. The government's failure to confront militant groups whose thuggish harassment and assaults on houses of worship and members of religious minorities has become increasingly aggressive. Those targeted include Ahmadiyas, Christians, and Shia Muslims. Indonesian monitoring groups have noted a steady increase in such attacks, one group finding 264 violent incidents over the past year. Islamist militant groups such as the Islamic People's Forum, Forum Umat Islam, and the Islamic Defenders Front have been implicated in attacks and arson on houses of worship and homes of members of minority religions. Such groups seek to justify violence by espousing an interpretation of Sunni Islam that labels most non-Muslims as infidels and Muslims who do not adhere to Sunni orthodoxy as blasphemers. Indonesian government officials and security forces have often facilitated harassment and intimidation of religious minorities by militant Islamist groups. Indonesian government institutions have also played a role in the violation of the rights and freedoms of the country's religious minorities. The increasing violence against religious minorities and the government's failure to take decisive steps against it violates guarantees of religious freedom in the Indonesian constitution and international law. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which Indonesia ratified in 2005, provides that persons belonging to minorities shall not be denied the right, in community with the other members of their group, to enjoy their own culture, to profess and practice their own religion. It is echoed in the hearts and minds of every person who is discriminated against because he or she looks different or thinks differently. Their difference was of no choice of their own. Some were born with a mental or physical difference, whilst others became this way through illness or accidents. This is not a choice made by individuals, but a choice that life has made for them. Many international government organizations and NGOs have been working relentlessly to reverse the injustice which is a part of our world today. Differently abled people also need special care, so let us talk about them now. Care for the differently abled. The human rights of differently abled persons include the following: indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated human rights. The human right to freedom from any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference based on the status of differently able, to which has the purpose or effect of impairing the enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms. The human right to freedom from indiscrimination in access to the housing, education, social services, health care, or employment. The human right to active participation in all aspects of social, economic, political, and cultural life of society, and in shaping decisions and policies affecting him or herself and community at the local, national, and international levels. The human right to equality of opportunity. The human right to full equality before the law and equal protection of the law. The human right to the highest attainable standard of health, to medical, psychological, and functional treatment, including prosthetic and orthotic appliances, to medical and social rehabilitation and other services necessary for the maximum development of capabilities, skills, and self-reliance. The human right to work according to capabilities, to receive wages that contribute to an adequate standard of living, and to receive equal remuneration for equal work. The human right to economic and social security and to an adequate standard of living. The human right to be treated with dignity and respect. Summary. Now, in the end, let us summarize what we have learnt in this lecture. Patterns of unequal access to social resources are commonly called social inequality. Hinduism's caste system has been widely criticized all over the world for being unfair to humans. More than half of the SC population is concentrated in the 5 states of Uttar Pradesh, 35.1 million, West Bengal, 18.4 million, Tamil Nadu, 11.8 million, Andhra Pradesh, 12.3 million, and Bihar, 13.0 million. The Indian Constitution guarantees them safety against discrimination. After 46 years of independence of the country, the backward classes or OBCs got recognition as a separate group of people for the purpose of 27% reservation in services in the GOI and public sector undertakings. The rise of the modern state with its clearly defined borders and monopoly on the use of force means that the hill tribes who were historically able to flee the state have come under its grasp. Women have been facing the inequalities in every sphere of life. The human rights of differently able persons include the following indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated human rights.